Today is Tuesday, March 20th, 2019. My name is Edna Sussman. I'm a reference librarian here at the Half Hollow Hills Community Library. We're interviewing Thomas J. Sullivan, a Vietnam Army veteran, as part of our Veterans Testimonial Project and in collaboration with the Library of Congress's Veterans History Project. Thank you so much, Tommy, for your service and for participating today. We really appreciate it.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Thank you. Tommy, where and when were you born?
I was born in Bayside, Queens, New York, July 28, 1945.
And who are your parents, their names and occupations?
My dad was an accountant, Thomas J. Sullivan Sr. I'm a junior.
Oh, okay.
And my mother was Margaret. Her maiden name was Tager. So Margaret T. Sullivan. And she was a housewife.
Okay.
And a wonderful mother.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you have any siblings?
Yes, I have a brother, Neil Sullivan. And he's currently living in Florida. And he was a corrections officer here in Nassau County for about 30 years.
Really?
And he moved to Florida, couldn't stand being retired for even 2 weeks, and joined a police force down there. And he did that for 10 years. Then he tried to retire again, and about a month, he did that for a month. And then he joined a second police department.
Really?
And now he's really retired.
Wow. How many years of service did he?
Altogether, I guess close to 40 years as,
That's
in law
amazing.
enforcement.
Was he in the military at all?
He was he was drafted into the Army shortly after, maybe about 2 years after I enlisted. And he got out on a medical discharge. He had, a medical issue. And so we got out.
What branch was he in?
Army.
Army.
Yeah.
So what were you doing before you entered the service?
I graduated from high school, Hicksville High School, in 1963 as a music major.
Here on Long Island?
Here on Long Island. And I've been a musician all my life since age 10. 1955, I started learning how to play sax in the Hicksville school system. And I went to 1 year of college, Nassau Community College, in which I knew more from what I learned in Hicksville than my professors did about music and music theory.
You said you were a music major out of high school.
Yes.
They had majors in high school?
They actually did. My senior year, I started in 5th grade learning how to play saxophone. By the time I was in junior high school, I was already doing my own gigs with a rock band.
Wow.
And by the time I was in high school, I was fortunate enough to have some of the best teachers that anybody could ever hope to have, because they not only knew everything about music, but they just connected with the kids, and it was really wonderful experience. So my senior year was the first year they had actual music major, which included music theory, because I had already been in band. I was already doing the plays, and when I couldn't be on stage, I was backstage. I loved everything having to do with entertaining, and I aced my theory. I got 99 on my theory regions. The same day that I got a 16 on one of my math regions.
No, oh my gosh.
So thank God for the music, because that I was able to graduate. Otherwise, maybe not. So I had mentioned to you earlier that I was a big fan of John Kennedy, and. So during my first year of college, the horrible event of November 22nd, 1963 happened, and I was devastated. And the music was going nowhere in school. I had a great band of a bunch of friends from Hicksville, and we were playing bars and that kind of stuff. And
while you were in college, community college?
Well, I was in community college because I wanted to become a music teacher and go back to Hicksville and teach. Oh. And but that wasn't happening, and the Kennedy tragedy affected me so deeply, and the Vietnam War was just starting to get serious. And I decided to go to the Army recruiter and find out, as a musician, what I can do to volunteer, to enlist and be a musician.
Why Army?
Well, my father was a World War II Army vet. Oh. So, I was like kind of second generation of that. And largely because of what Kennedy said in his only inaugural address, sadly, about ask not what you can do for your country, what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. So that like really stuck with me, and so I decided to go see the recruiter and find out as a musician, what it is, that I could do in the Army. And he, basically, long story short, is that I was able to audition for the West Point Band, and successfully. And I was admitted to the West Point Band, and that was kind of like a guarantee of that would be the duty once I enlisted. And that is what happened. So I took basic training at Fort Dix. So it was kind of funny.
But were you then enrolled at West Point for school?
I was not a cadet. No, I always try to make that
So
point.
you were a professional musician for the band?
I was yes. So the West Point Band were enlisted men that was their duty was to be part of the band.
Okay.
And
there were no students in that
there
band?
were no students in the band. Now, honestly, the students, I had like a very good friend of mine from Hicksville High School who was a cadet at the time that I was there. And that was fun. But the cadets were far more athletic, far more intelligent, far more patriotic than I was. In a million years, I couldn't have gotten into West Point and done what they did. But I was, beyond proud to be there in what I was good at, to help them. There was the long story short, also with the cadets, they had to not only learn military training, but they also had to be on 3 varsity teams at all times. So their plates were so full that it was impossible for them to also be in a band. So that was the reason why the band were not cadets and the band were enlisted men.
So there were no students in the music, no music for the
They
students?
actually had a cadet glee club that they used to perform on the Ed Sullivan Show every Christmas week. So that was, basically the only amount of time really that they were even lucky to be able to handle that.
Yeah.
Maybe they let them out of one varsity sport for that. I'm not sure.
That's really interesting. I didn't know that. I thought West Point had a music program because you always see the West Point band. But
Yeah, and the West Point Band just had their 200th anniversary last year. And with a wonderful, they had a reception at Lincoln Center.
were you involved in that?
I was invited to watch it. So it was the current West Point Band who was there, and the Hellcats, which I'll get into in a minute, the
Okay,
Hellcats.
good.
And they had classical composers who composed original music for that event at Lincoln Center, and it was breathtaking.
Sure.
And and West Point itself goes back to before we were a country.
Really?
They were, during the colonies, West Point was a very strategic outpost because it was high over the Hudson River, and during the Revolutionary War, they could spot the British ships coming before in the West Point Museum, there's a chain link that each link is about this big, that they stretched across from one side of the Hudson to the other to prevent the ships from, it would stop the ships in their tracks, and then they trained all of the cannons on the ships and could destroy them before they got any further up the Hudson.
That's
so
amazing.
A lot of wonderful history up
Nice.
there.
Did you learn that when you were as an enlisted man in the Army? Or
The West Point history?
Yeah.
Yeah, they have an incredible museum up there, and I learned that and a lot of other things about West Point when I was there.
What an honor to be chosen for that.
Oh, it was amazing.
What instrument did you play?
Well, I auditioned as a saxophone player when I went up to audition for the West Point Band, and they loved my audition, but Colonel Schempf, who's passed on now, but he was the band director up there, and he personally gave me my audition, which was it didn't happen all the time. Usually it was like a section leader from the saxophones or the brass, whatever it was. But that day, for whatever reason, he gave me my audition, and he goes, "Oh, you're definitely good enough to be here. We want you." And they actually wanted to protect musicians from the draft.
Oh, really?
Yeah, this is like unofficial.
Why?
But so, well, Vietnam was getting very serious at that time, and they wanted to take the best musicians in the country. Instead of them getting drafted, let them enlist and, be in the West Point band. And, so they said, we want you to come here, but we don't have any slots for saxophone, so would you mind learning piccolo to be in the Hellcats? And the Hellcats were the bugle, drum bugle and piccolo corps, and that goes even before the 200 years of the West Point band. They went even before that. Really? Like the poster that you see with the piccolo player
Washington
and the drummer,
yeah.
right? That you see on all of the famous posters was kind of based on the Hellcats.
Okay.
So the Hellcats go like way, way, way back. So I was very proud to be part of that too.
Nice.
And so after my basic training.
Was basic training different than other basic training?
No, it was like real basic training.
Was?
Yeah,
Okay.
it was. I
Where
took
did
my
you do
basic.
that?
Yeah, it was at Fort Dix,
Okay.
New Jersey, and they basically prepared everybody there to be soldiers, because really Vietnam. They were telling us at the time Vietnam was like getting real, and most of you were going to be going over there in combat, so you had to really learn how to be a soldier.
Now, you knew at that point you were going to be in the music part.
I was hoping.
Oh,
Because when you sign,
Yeah.
when you sign, and 3 years of your life to the Army, they basically owned you, whatever they wanted to do with you. But I was fortunate that after my basic training, I was assigned to West Point, and that's where I did spend my 3 years.
was the audition before or after basic?
It was before.
Okay, so you really knew that hopefully.
Yeah. I mean, at that time, if you enlisted as opposed to waited and hoped not to get drafted, for a lot of people were hoping they didn't get drafted, or if you got drafted, if you enlisted, you could choose. Really a lot of different schools. You could learn a trade, and then be assigned to any part of the world. As part of it, you could learn to be a radar guy. You could learn intelligence. So there was all kinds of schools that that you could go to. I was fortunate. I was able to bypass. They had back then the Navy School of Music, which most musicians had to go to that for 6 months, and then they could try auditioning for things like the West Point Band or the Army Band in Washington. So I was very fortunate that I did well enough on my audition that I could bypass that and go straight from basic training to West Point.
Nice, very nice. That must have been very exciting.
Oh, it was
You got to play.
Yep.
That was,
Yeah.
So, you picked the Army because of your dad, and when you departed for training camp, what was the training like, the basic training?
Well, in my case, I enlisted February 1st, 1965, and it was in Fort Dix, New Jersey. It was the coldest 2 months of my life.
Wow.
That's what I remember about it. It was like really, really cold.
I mean, I guess a lot of training was outside because of...
Most of it was outside.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
They woke you up at 4 a.m.
Wow.
So you were out mustered, at 4:30, and I think we ran a mile every morning before we were allowed to eat.
Yeah.
And there was a funny story. I was 19 when I enlisted, and many of the guys in my company had been drafted, and some of them like right up to age 26, where they couldn't draft you after your 26th birthday. So there was a lot of guys. By the way, I weighed 112.
Oh, gee. Wow.
And a lot of the guys in my company were like 200 pounds, big beer bellies, right? So what I remember was the line, before they allowed you to eat breakfast, they had 76 parallel bars, and you had to jump up and and you had to go through all 76 bars before you were allowed to go and eat.
Jeez.
And everything in the Army is alphabetical. So me being S, I was always at the end of the line, of every line. And but by the time when my turn came up, it looked like Zippy the chimp. I zip, 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 and I was just so I could eat like I weighed 145 pounds 2 weeks later.
You're kidding.
No, because it was all the exercise. I was coming from being a long-haired musician playing Beatles songs. That's why I was so skinny.
Yeah.
Come home at like 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning on a weekend, and sleep all day.
Yeah.
you know.
Wow.
So I was like just ridiculously skinny, and
But it was a healthy weight that you put on.
it was of course, yeah.
Yeah.
It was all, all of the physical, they all calisthenics every day and running, and learning how to use the rifle.
You did have to do that, too.
So, oh yeah, we did basically everything. No pun intended, basically.
Right.
And
Do you recall your instructors at all? What were they like?
it was funny. My drill instructor was Sergeant Brockman, and he was 1 year older than me, and he was a staff sergeant.
Wow.
So he came up very quickly in the ranks, and I do have a story about him, but in case he's still, I know he can't be in the service, but I can't tell the story that he could have gotten in trouble. We all covered for him.
Oh.
So we really liked him. He was
Nice.
good. Some of the other guys, all of them had, as tough as they were, in case I had to go to advanced infantry training, which a lot of my platoon mates did. That's where you went before you were assigned to combat.
Oh, I see.
And their job really was to toughen you up and make sure that you could take that next leg of training and really protect yourself and protect your country if you had to go into combat. So I was beyond extremely fortunate that the talent that I could provide to the Army was music and
Very nice. And it was something you love to do. That's,
Oh yeah.
and share with everybody.
Yes.
So how was it adapting to military life? The barracks and the food and regiment and all that.
It was. I led an extremely sheltered life up until that point. I was very independent as a kid. I started playing rock and roll gigs when I was 12. Wow. So I was out late nights before I was even a teenager.
With a group?
With a group, yeah. I always had my own group. And there's kind of an offshoot story to the West Point Band and my basic training. The group that I was in was called the Night Riders. We were all from Hicksville. And in '65, when I did decide to join the Army, I had to inform the band that there's no more band because I'm joining the Army. I was the band leader.
Oh.
I was the lead singer. I was the guy who did all the arrangements.
They must have been upset.
And the lead guitar player.
Wow.
So they were very, very upset with me.
How many people in the band?
There were 4 at the time. And extremely upset with me.
Sure.
What are you, stupid? In the Army, you're an idiot,
But
they tried to talk me out of it, but they couldn't talk me out of it.
They couldn't.
No. As a matter of fact, I could have. I've had asthma all my life, and it's well under control now.
They still took you. The Army still
Well,
took you.
why? Because I lied. A lot of people lie on their physical to get out of the Army. I lied to get into the Army. I didn't want to. I really wanted to do what I did, so I didn't tell them about it. I hope there's a statute of limitations now.
I would think.
I mean, I have a friend of mine from high school who lied about his age and joined the Marines at age 15. And then they discovered him, but it was after all of his basic training. They discovered it, and then they kicked him out.
They did.
Yeah, they didn't want to be sued,
I see.
having a kid that young.
Wow.
But so the 2 friends of 2 of the 3, 1 year after I was assigned to the West Point Band, both had been drafted. Both were daughters to Vietnam. They just finished their basic training, and they were both on their way to Vietnam.
Wow.
And as luck would have it, you talk about the way the universe works and the right time and the right place. 1 year after I was in the Hellcats doing all of the parades with Piccolo, and by the way, that was very cold too. Cold in playing reveille at 6 a.m. every other morning.
Where was that?
At West Point.
Point.
They used to do live piccolo, bugle, and drums live at 3 different barracks of the cadets, and that's what woke them up every morning.
They really did.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
And, for like a day that it was 15 below zero with 40-mile-hour winds, that was...
How do you play on a metal instrument with that?
Oh,
And
I have one of our buglers. First of all, you kind of try to stay asleep while you do that, and you sleep on your feet. And then the leader of the formation calls everybody to attention, and then you start exactly 10 minutes to 6, right? So the one time the bugler didn't warm up his mouthpiece first. So he put his mouthpiece in, and the tip of his tongue just came out. It came out. So
And
he didn't have to do Reveille for 6 months until his tongue grew back.
Wow.
You know?
Oh, my God.
And whenever I tell any of these stories, I always preface it with whatever we endured at West Point was, absolutely nothing compared to what our friends,
Sure.
were enduring in Vietnam. So I'm eternally, thankful, for what they did,
Sure.
But again, we were doing our part.
Yes, of course.
And
Now, your two friends?
the two friends,
what happened?
Bill Jordan and Jim Walker, they both live in North Carolina now. But, so they were drafted, and they had their orders. And by the way, thank you for returning me back, because
No,
I go
it's
off in tangents
No, I
a
love
lot.
it.
Yes. And they had their orders for Vietnam. At the time, they had a new General Westmoreland, who was very famous for commanding Vietnam. He had been the commandant up at West Point before he was, so when he was assigned to Vietnam, they had a new commandant come in to replace him. And before I was there, the cadets on their Saturday night dances, and let me preface that with, that was the one chance they had in their week to let off steam. And they used to bus girls up to be dates, and they would have their Saturday night dance, and that was the only time they could blow off steam. But they were getting music provided by the same guys who prevented me from being a sax player, who were there for 20 years as sax players. They had these dance band combos that used to be assigned to perform for the cadets, but they were getting their, my father's age music. They were getting Glenn Miller songs.
Oh, kind of old for the kids.
And this is 1966 now,
Right.
1 year after I was at West Point. And the new superintendent, General Bennett, came in to replace Westmoreland. And he took his tour, and he went to a Saturday night dance, and he saw all of them bored out of their minds, not having fun. So he called my commanding officer and said, in 2 weeks, I want a rock and roll band at all of these cadet dances. From now on, I want a cadet band, not a cadet,
addition,
a
or
West Point band, rock band.
Instead of or in addition?
Well, in addition to the regular West Point band doing all the parades and stuff.
Okay.
And as it turned out, my Jim and Bill, my two friends from the Hicksville Rock Band, were on their 2 weeks leave with orders for San Diego, which meant Vietnam next stop. And I had their service numbers written down in my pocket. So I went to Colonel Schempf and I said, I heard that you want a rock and roll band. He goes, yes, I want you to start this rock and roll band. And I said, look, here's the problem. I said, everyone here in the West Point band hates me because I'm the only guy, it's all classical people and jazz people. That was it up at West Point. And they really looked down on rock and roll, right? And I mean, I knew classical myself, but I also knew rock and roll. So I said, it just so happens I can give you this rock band in 2 weeks. He goes, how's that going to happen? I said, and I explained. I said, my whole civilian rock band is in the Army now, but I'm here, and they're going overseas. He said, well, if you get me their service numbers.
Wow.
And I just went like this, and I handed it to him. Well, I was still there. He called the Pentagon, and one of his best friends from personnel in charge of the whole Army, he said, I need these two guys at West Point. 2 days later, they were reassigned to West Point.
But you were 4.
Well, the third guy was never in the Army, and I'm not sure. I'm not sure why.
Okay.
But he never was in the Army. And
But 3 would work.
But 3 worked. Yeah, the 3 did work. And so we were only separated for 1 year of not doing gigs.
Fantastic.
So all that happened during that year, where they were like another year's worth of Beatles songs and Motown songs and stuff. But so basically they were reassigned
To the West Point band.
to the West Point band.
That's
and
amazing.
they gave us a blank check to go up to the music store up in Beacon, New York, and which was, by the way, just opened up by a Hellcat bugler who had been in for 3 years and got out and opened that store. They bought us our whole PA system, our microphones. They bought me a Fender Strat guitar.
Nice.
They bought Bill a Fender bass guitar. We had an echo unit, the whole 9 yards. And so that's how that West Point
That's
band, rock
amazing.
band it was created.
So what were your duties? To play at the dances, but
Well,
also at ceremonies and things?
At
or-
first, I had to stay as a piccolo player in the Hellcats and also do the rock band. And that got a little difficult because I would be, getting home from gigs at like 1 o'clock in the morning after breaking the equipment down and all that. And then I would have to be up at 5:30 a.m. the next day.
Were you living at West Point?
At the time, yes, I was living in the barracks at the time. And so eventually, they reassigned me out of the marching band up into the library. So for my last 6 months, I was up in the band library, which, was cataloging the music, putting things out on the music stands, that kind of stuff. Because the cadets absolutely loved, and we kept the same name. It was the Night Riders. That's the name we had as civilians, and we kept the name.
Oh, nice.
And as a matter of fact, I can't tell you how many 50th and 55th reunions that the cadets still hire me to play. And I say, they'll never remember me, but they all remember.
So do your two musician friends come too?
They did. We did a reunion in I think in 08 of all of us. At a West Point band concert up at West Point. And that was great.
Yeah.
And Bill hadn't played in 50 years, and I should mention Carolyn too, because earlier I had showed you a picture of that band, and I was dating a girl that I knew from high school, Carolyn Wood, and right after I joined the Army, we had been a little bit out of touch for a year. We run all the plays in high school together, me as a musician, her as a dancer. And when we started dating, I knew that the band, the rock band needed to be done. So what I wanted was my fourth piece, and I said, guess what, you're going to be the keyboard player.
The keyboard player?
The keyboard player.
She could play?
And she goes, I'm not a musician, I'm a dancer.
Yeah.
I said, well, I'm going to teach you. So I taught her one song at a time on keyboard, and she was so fastidious. She would just practice hours and hours and hours at a time and never missed. She always learned her parts. And so then she became the fourth Night Rider.
Did she enlist?
And we get married.
Oh.
So she was never in the Army, but because she was my wife, and then I moved out of the barracks, and I had enlisted men's quarters, which were beautiful up at West Point.
Very nice.
And so it was an excuse for me to keep seeing her.
Sure.
But it turned into, and I should jump ahead a little bit.
Well, the Army didn't mind, though, that she played with you?
No, because I showed you a picture a little bit earlier of the West Point Rock Band, and she was in the official. She was,
That's great.
officially in the rock band.
That's great.
As the
As a
wife
civilian.
As a civilian, yeah. Okay. And
nice. I
I have a little offshoot. The first gig that we played that was not a Saturday night dance was at the Cadet Mess Hall. And we did that once. We could only do it once.
Why?
Because of what happened.
Oh.
She wore these little mini skirts, right? So the first class, like the freshmen, the first classmen.
Yeah.
Or not the first class, like the whatever they call it, the plebes.
Oh, the plebes.
The plebes. They had to literally for the whole year. They did what they call a square meal, where they couldn't even look at their plate. They had to stare straight ahead, and they had to go like this with their knife and fork, and they had to at 90-degree angles eat like this.
You kidding?
Yeah.
For how long? A year?
I think it was for the whole first year.
Whoa.
They were really low-class citizens for the first year. A lot of harassment from the upper class.
Well, you didn't have to do that.
No. So they said, hey, let's bring the rock band in for a dinner concert. And they did it maybe once a month, once a week, I forget. And they usually would bring a little combo up, which didn't cause much of a stir, and the kid has to ignore them. So when they did us, she sang "These Boots Are Made for Walking." That was one of the songs that we did back then for the dances. It was almost a riot. Including the plebes were standing on their tables, dancing.
That's great.
And that was the first and last time they ever allowed us to
But I
do
thought
that.
they wanted a band there. So
Well, they did for that, but they decided we better stick with just the dances.
that's great.
Yeah, just the Saturday night
really
dances.
good.
Yeah.
So for your 3 years you were there playing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what other functions did you play at? What other types of things?
Well, it was mainly the dances. They were. Oh, by the way, I wrote a book about the West Point band. years and years ago, I wrote this book, and I've just been too busy to, there's a lot of legwork that goes into trying to get a book published, and I know people tell me I should self-publish, and maybe I should.
Now that's a really big thing.
It is, yeah, self-publishing. So the book really has a lot of these wonderful, a lot of funny stories.
Nice. You should publish that.
Yeah, I really should. But when you ask me, about what else did we do, so the Officers Club, knew about the rock band, so they wanted us on a Friday night. So we did one Officers Club job on a Friday night, and we got in there, and it was like all young captains and lieutenants and their girlfriends. Most of them weren't even married. And they were having this great time. This is one chapter of my book that I'll just...
Okay, good.
Right? And having a great time, and we're about 2 hours into our 3-hour job, and I look over in the corner, and the front door opens up, and this old guy, who now would have been like 40 years younger than I am now.
Oh, okay.
So he was probably in his 40s, 50s maybe. He comes in with his wife, and as soon as he walks in, he goes like this, right? Cover on his ears.
Too loud.
Like he can't, too loud. And he walks right over to the band, stops us in the middle of a song, and says, you turn the, he's screaming, you turn this music down, or I'll pull the plug on you. And,
Wow.
knowing that I was in the Army,
Yeah.
'cause to me, my music all my life, still, it's like religious. And that was my mission, was to play rock and roll for these young guys. And I said, very respectfully, I said, sir, I said, this is a rock and roll band. I said, I'm the leader of this mission. Our mission is to play rock and roll. Rock and roll is loud. Everyone else here is having a great time, and if it's too loud for you, maybe you shouldn't be here, sir.
What was his rank?
Major. Ooh. He was a major, and I was like a 3-stripe sergeant. And as I'm doing this, I'm screaming in my head, "Don't say this! Don't do this, because you will be out of the band, by Monday." So he goes, "If you don't turn down, I'm going to pull the plug on you." And I said, "If you pull the plug, with all due respect, sir." If you pull the plug on us, I'm going to break, that's the end of our job. I'm going to break everything down, and we're going to leave. And the rest of the people who have been having a great time, they're going to be deprived of the rest of the evening. So sure enough, I turn around, I tell the band, turn it up.
Oh, you didn't?
Oh
my God.
So I tell the band to turn it up, and we did. He comes up 2 metros later, and he pulls the plug. So I go, that's it. We just left. And this was on a Saturday night. And the cadets didn't get us that night because of this. Oh. They weren't happy, right? So I
you
figure,
left after?
So all Sunday, I figure I'm going to hear about this on Monday, and this might be my last weekend at West Point, because I figure I'm out of here. And the next day, I get called down to Colonel Shemp's office on Monday.
Now, who was he?
He's my commanding officer. He's the one who
auditioned you.
Who auditioned me, and he's the one who said, you have to give me a rock and roll band. Right? And the one who got my 2 best friends transferred to West Point. So he calls me into his office, and I figured, oh, here it comes. Usually when I was called down, it was because my haircut was too long, right? Which I always try to skate as far as I could with as long hair as I could. And he calls me down, and he goes, there was some fireworks Saturday night at the Officers Club. And I started to tell my side of the story, and he goes, don't worry about it. He goes, the young captain went to General Bennett, who was the superintendent, who was basically the dean, up at West Point, told him what happened. He called the major and reamed him out. So the major is in trouble, not you.
Wow.
He goes, you handle the profession. You said, he goes, I heard what you said. They overheard what you said. This is my detail, and this is my mission, and this is what the mission's. So he said, don't worry about it, you're not in trouble. So,
wow, that's a good story.
Yeah.
So he never went to one of those dances
No,
again,
but
right?
neither did we. That was and then we did one other job up at Stewart Air Force Base. Like the word spread about our rock and roll band up to the Air Force Base at Stewart Field.
Where is that?
That's up in Newburgh, just north of West Point. And they had this beautiful Officers Club out there. So we did one Saturday night dance for those guys, and they loved it too, And it was
That's
so much.
a really good story.
And it was like the equalizer, being a rock band for the young officers, because, in basic training, I'm sure you hear this, from everybody who's doing these interviews, the enlisted men, you do see an officer,
Right.
you salute, and they're up here,
Yeah.
and the enlisted men down here. Of course, we do all the work,
Right.
but the enlisted men, right? And I apologize to any officers who were
No.
involved with this, but that was the deal. So doing any of these rock and roll gigs for the officers was it was an equalizer, because
Nice.
I said it wasn't officer and enlisted. It was just people listening,
Yeah.
and the band. So
Nice.
that was always a lot of fun.
Very nice.
Yeah.
So do you think you performed every week, pretty much?
Pretty much.
And then during the week,
Yeah.
what were your duties? You had rehearsals or what?
Yeah, well, most of the time, really for a year and a half after that, I was really doing the band, the rock band, and also the Hellcats. So it was a pretty grueling schedule, because yes, look, the rock band had a rehearsal also, so we didn't have much time off.
And what instruments were in the Hellcats?
Well, again, that was a bugle, drums, and piccolo.
Right. So how many of you?
There were probably about maybe 40 of us altogether.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they were like maybe 15 piccolos.
Wow.
Or maybe 12 of each, 12 drummers, 12
Okay.
piccolos, 12 bugles.
So what kind of performances did they do?
The Hellcats did, well, like I mentioned earlier, we did the, every single day, 7 days a week, there were 18 of us, which performed reveille to wake the cadets
Okay.
up every morning. And that was a tradition that went like way, back to the 1800s.
Okay.
And same music that had been played
Oh, nice.
since the 1800s.
Nice.
And, so that was part of our and we were also part of the marching band, which did parades 2 or 3 times a week.
Okay.
And Hellcats were always at the end of the marching band. And at the end of the parades, the whole marching band would walk off the field, and the Hellcats would stay. And then we marched all of the cadets back to their barracks.
Oh, nice.
The Hellcat buglers played taps live every night.
Every night.
The one really sad duty was that we played a lot of the same first-classmen, the upperclassmen that we had played for rock for, who were dancing to us, got assigned right upon graduation, got assigned to be platoon leaders as first lieutenants in Vietnam, and many of them came back like soon to be buried. So the buglers used to have to play at the funerals. That was another of the band duties, and it was a exciting, extremely sad time.
Sure.
To be there, and again, it just hit home how lucky all of us in the West Point band were to be doing what we were doing. But again, like the fact that. I'm really proud of
And you should be.
even if I had just, been in the marching band, that would have been good, but it was just, like fateful that I was there in the right time, right place. The right superintendent saw that they needed rock, and I was there at the right time. Because when I enlisted, I figured, here goes my hair. Like you see how long it is now,
yeah.
right? It was
they
even
make you
longer
cut it?
when I was 19. So the first day of basic training, the first thing they do is take,
Oh, they shave your head?
yeah,
Really?
they shave it.
Oh.
And when that happened, I figured 2 things are going to happen. I'm not going to have hair for the next 3 years, and I'm not going to play rock and roll for the next 3 years. So you never know.
You're very
what,
lucky, but talented too. Otherwise, you wouldn't have gotten
Yeah,
in.
it was like
Talent is
music
everything.
is in my blood.
Yeah. Were your
and,
folks musical?
You know what? It's funny. Neither of them were musicians, but from the time, probably from the womb, because I know now, they know that before you're born, you can hear music. So my mom and dad had this eclectic taste in music and had this huge record collection. And my mother loved classical, particularly Russian composers like Stravinsky and Mussorgsky and Tchaikovsky, a lot of skis.
Right. Yep.
So
there were a lot of them.
That was being played in my house all the time, and
Nice.
the both of them loved the musicals, Rodgers and Hammerstein.
Oh, yeah.
So I grew up listening to South Pacific and Carousel. And the Flower Drums, all of this wonderful music, and especially the classic. And my father loved Frank Sinatra and jazz.
You got
And
everything.
Dixieland. So by the time I could, the first time I could learn an instrument was fifth grade, and I decided, let me sign up for band. But almost everything I learned in band, I knew. in my
Did
mind.
you
You
pick
know,
the
I knew it
instrument,
all.
or your folks picked the first instrument?
I wanted to be a sax player, so
you did?
so I picked sax,
Okay.
and so I've been playing sax since 1955.
Wow. Was your brother a musician too?
He was in the elementary school band for 1 year as a trombone player. And the only thing he wanted to know about trombone was how to go,
yeah, slide.
which he knew the first day. And that's as far as he got.
Oh,
so
that's funny.
he dropped out by the time
pretty
we got
good.
into junior high.
So, did you have to travel abroad at all with the group, or
No.
You
we
stayed
never-
in New York?
The furthest I traveled with the West Point Band was down, every year they did a special performance down in Washington, D.C.
Oh.
Near the Pentagon, there was a thing called the Army Field House, and they had a big pageant that I think the actual Army band was there. We were there, and I think it may have been just the Hellcats who came down to be part of that. And so that. No, I lied. We traveled by train from the West Point train station to Chicago.
Oh, wow.
In 65 or 66 for the Army-Navy game, which was held in
kidding.
Chicago.
Oh, wow.
And that was amazing because the entire Corps of Cadets and the whole band and all our equipment and everything, we got on the train station right at West Point and literally, took the train all the way to Chicago. And that was a lot of fun.
You weren't marching, or did you march?
I forget. I don't think we did a routine on
That's what I
stage
mean,
like the
yeah.
college bands do.
Right,
I don't
right.
think. And no disrespect to the West Point band, but musically we were about as good as the New York Philharmonic.
Really?
They were.
Wow.
It's still even better now, but even then, they were like really amazing. But marching, like when I mentioned earlier, the cadets with their square meals.
Yes.
So if you looked at the parade field, you see the whole Corps of Cadets doing 90-degree
together,
angles.
yeah.
And then the West Point band following, it was kind of like,
Oh,
so we weren't too precise
That's funny.
with the marching.
but the music came out nice, I'm sure.
yeah, the music was phenomenal, yeah.
Did you travel back home, or how did you stay in touch with friends and family?
West Point was an hour and a half drive from Hicksville, where I still lived with my parents when I enlisted, and I was dating Carolyn. So I would, it was like an hour and a half drive, and a lot of times we would finish, like a parade would end at 4:30. By the time we get back to the barracks, it would be around 5:30. So I could be in Hicksville by 7 o'clock to go out on a date,
Nice.
go to a movie, go
Yeah.
out to dinner.
Very nice.
So I was able to do that a lot, and then that was before the rock band started. So then when the rock band did start, I used to force Carolyn to take the ride up to West Point to rehearse with the rock band.
Was she in Hicksville?
We were both in the same year, class of '63 in
Okay.
Hicksville High School, and so that was. It was great for me. I mean,
Yeah.
it was so close. And I mean, I would go home sometimes during the week.
Really?
As long as I was back by 5:30 a.m.
Oh,
to
okay.
play reveille.
And rehearsals were during the day or at night, or-
Rehearsals, well, like the actual, the Hellcats used to rehearse in the morning. Up until around noon, and then you have a little time off, and the parades were about 4:30.
Okay.
And then the rest of the evening was off.
It was free. Oh, that's nice.
Yeah. So there was a lot of free time.
Did you have to practice? I mean, musicians usually.
Well, I had to practice piccolo a lot because that wasn't my instrument.
Right.
And
right.
it was like fingering was fingering was simpler. By the way, my interviewer Edna is a flute player and piccolo player.
That's
like I
true.
was.
It's true.
Yes.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. So I did have to practice piccolo a lot. And I don't know if we have time for an offshoot story.
Of course.
My best friend in the West Point band was a guy named Ed Patey, who was a concert violinist. And I had mentioned to you earlier, he just retired from the Baltimore Symphony as principal first violinist. He was 1 day short of his 26th birthday, and he was expecting to check his mailbox and get a plane ticket that he had bought to go to Houston because he was accepted as a second violinist in the Houston Symphony.
Wow.
And instead, it was his draft note. So he was drafted 1 day before he couldn't be drafted anymore.
He was 26 years old?
25 and
25.
364 days.
Wow.
Yeah. So he had to put his violin away. He had to take basic training for 2 months where he couldn't, from being a classical musician yourself, that a violinist has the hardest job of all because they have to practice probably minimum of 5 hours a day, every day, just to not be horrible.
Right.
And if you wanted to be good, you had to add hours, and if you wanted to be great, you had to do it almost never sleep.
Sure.
So for 2 months, he had to learn every way to kill people. For 2 solid months, and he couldn't play violin. Then when he got assigned to West Point, he had to learn how to play piccolo.
Oh, he did
because
too?
anybody who, like a pianist or a guitarist or a string player, anybody like that would have to learn how to play piccolo. And so now he had to spend at least a month and a half learning how to play piccolo. And they hazed him. One night they came into, I won't mention the name.
Okay, no, don't mention
Because
names.
I'm sure there's a statute of limitation. But we had 2 of the members of the band who were like only a couple of years older than me. And they had a major's uniform and a sergeant major's uniform. And they came into his
Bunk?
his bunk at 3 a.m. Turned the lights on, pretending they were like basic training type guys, real regular army. And they made him get up. They made him take out his violin, and they put a Paganini concerto, which is one of the hardest things to play, on a music stand. Say, play this. And he's like, but humma, humma, humma.
Yeah. Oh, my God.
He's, saying, well, but I have to learn how to play piccolo. I took basic. No excuses. You're in the Army now, right? So he sounds like Jack Benny.
Were you there when this happened?
No, but I heard about it the next day. So he sounded like this squawk, right? He couldn't play anything. And they go, well, you're shipping out tomorrow morning. Right? So he obviously couldn't sleep for he gets down the next day at breakfast. This is when we were all living in the barracks. Next day at breakfast, he looks over and he sees the table next to him, the major and the sergeant major, with the same rank as him, eating next to him. And then he realized, what had happened.
Oh, my God.
And, but he survived.
He was okay?
Yeah.
Wow.
He was okay.
That's amazing. I mean, to learn piccolo, and you too, after playing different instruments. I mean, it's not so easy.
Yeah. And again, like for what our comrades we're doing.
It's all
in my book, I make a point out of every funny story like that in the book. I try to start every chapter off with what was really going on, with the war. And, to put things in context.
I mean, you probably knew some of the cadets
Yes.
there who were sent away, sent abroad.
Yeah. I mean, we didn't really have time. They didn't have, but neither of us, the cadets nor the band, really had time to get together socially.
Right.
And it was frowned upon, too.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, because, we were, again, enlisted men were different.
Oh, I see.
Different, a little lower on the wrong.
Levels,
socially.
I get it. Right.
Yeah. But,
so you were there from 60, when did
65 till 68.
68. And where were you in 68? You were still at West Point when you were finished with your service. Did they give you the option to re-up?
Oh, that's a funny story. Yes. The success of the rock band, they really wanted me to re-enlist. They the rock band was, they couldn't do it without the rock band. So they were about 6 months on. They were really pitching me to re-enlist. And normally, we got to a rank of Spec 5, which is equivalent to 3 stripes, but it was Specialist 5. And when you reported to West Point, from being a trainee, that's the lowest. That's not even a private or a private first class. Trainee is like the lowest rank. So when you graduated from basic training, you became a private, which wasn't even a stripe yet. So when I reported to West Point, I was a private with no stripes. The day I reported to West Point, they made me a Spec 4, which is equivalent to a corporal. And that was just automatic. That's what happened up at West Point. And about a year in, they made you a Spec 5, which is equivalent to 3 stripes. And so normally when you re-enlisted, they would promise you your E6. And actually our formal uniforms had the stripes. Technically we were specialists, but so my uniform on the parade field was a 3-stripe sergeant. So they said, we'll give you the 4th stripe if you re-enlist, or anybody would get that. And I was like kind of, I really wanted to get out.
You did.
I wanted to be a rock and roll star, never thinking, at least I'll try. I didn't think it would ever happen. And they, at one point, said, we'll give you 2 stripes. And then we'll send you to the Navy School of Music and make you a warrant officer, which is kind of like in between officer and enlisted.
Okay.
And, but, you lead the way, you continue this, the rock band. Mm-hmm. And I kept, I was like, just kept getting better and better.
Yeah.
And now, I really had to think about it. And I was already married and living on the base.
Did you have any kids?
No, no. And, we're long since divorced, me and Carol.
Oh, okay.
Many years.
Okay.
And my wife, Susan, and her are like really good friends.
Really?
Yeah, people find that hard to believe, but
Yeah.
they're very, very,
Very
good
nice.
friends. Yeah. And so what eventually happened, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I should, as soon as I did get out of there, but I shouldn't jump ahead.
Okay.
So they were asking me, will you re-enlist? And then the last thing they dangled in front of me was, you know how the Cadet Glee Club is on Ed Sullivan? Every Christmas, if you re-enlist, this December, we'll put the Night Riders, the rock band, we'll put the rock band instead of the Cadet Glee Club
you kidding?
on Ed Sullivan.
Wow.
And then I said, you know what? If that happens, I'll have to wait another 3 years before I get out. But, I've already been on the Ed. How many people are ever on the Ed Sullivan show?
Sure.
So another friend of mine from Hicksville, his name is Jimmy Rosica, really good friend, but we were never in a band together. He was starting to come up about 2 months before I got out, so probably around Christmas time.
He was a musician too?
Of 67. Yeah, he was a musician. He would come up every weekend to personally say, don't re-enlist. I have this great band. It's all a bunch of guys from Hicksville and one guy from Valley Stream. And it's really great. Get out of the Army, move back to Long Island, and we're going to put this band together, and it's going to really go places. And I go, well, I don't know about going places, but I'm sure it's going to be a great band, because all the musicians from Hicksville were great. Billy Joel, by the way, speaking about Hicksville, was also had some of the same teachers as I did.
Wow.
And he did okay for himself.
Yeah, I think so.
Also. And I'm the second most famous musician from Hicksville.
Really? Great.
Yeah, a long second.
Nice.
Okay?
Nice.
And, Billy's beyond wonderful.
Yeah.
But so Jimmy kept telling me, don't re-enlist. So my last question was about re-enlisting. Do I have to keep getting the short haircuts? And they said yes. And that was just two other
That was the
broken
deal breaker.
I said, okay, I'm out of here.
Really?
So I did decide to get out. So 2 months after leaving the service,
68?
in 68, so February 1st, 68, I got out, and we started rehearsing with this new bunch of musicians from Hicksville. And our first ever job was a Battle of the Bands, and it was at a place called the Cloud 9 in Farmingdale, which some people from here would still remember the place. Great nightclub. And it was a Battle of the Bands that night. So there were 10 bands competing along with us. Mm-hmm. And we had never played before. We only knew 8 songs, and we played all 8 songs that we knew. Mm-hmm. And Johnny Maestro and the Del Satins, at the time, that was his band. They were the headline act. So you saw all of the amateurs, and then you got treated to Johnny Maestro. And I was a huge fan of his back to his days with the Crests, with 16 Candles and Step by Step and Trouble in Paradise. Loved all of his records. And I said, well, we're probably not going to get the gig, but we'll get to see Johnny Maestro. And we didn't get the gig. But at the end of the, we're in our dressing room, packing everything up, and knock comes on the door, and it's Maestro's manager saying, Johnny loves your band. And he just got a new record contract, and he wants you guys to be his new band.
Oh, my God.
And,
Really?
Yeah, I was 22 at that time. Some of the guys in the band were as young as 17 at the time. And it was like a bolt of lightning.
How big was the band?
We were 7 pieces.
Oh.
6 from Hicksville, 1 from Valley Stream.
Oh.
And basically, that was the birth of the Brooklyn Bridge.
Wow.
So it started literally. That's why West Point and Brooklyn Bridge are like so connected with only a 2-month gap.
Amazing.
In between. Yeah.
Wow. It wouldn't have happened.
Probably. Everything. There's a song called "God Bless the Broken Road," and it's about It's a country tune, beautiful song, and I do it, in my performances now. And it's all about how right now you're with your soulmate. But if you hadn't been with a lot of people who broke your heart and a lot of bad things in your life, you never would have met this person.
Right.
So it's the broken road. God bless the broken road that led me straight to you.
That's nice.
And that's like the story of my life,
Amazing.
Really, yeah.
So after this band, then what did you do? What happened?
After the Brooklyn Bridge, we had a great run. We had...
How long was that?
They're still together. They never... And Jimmy Ruzicka is still with them.
Wow.
And they have like 3 of the original guys who were still with them out of the 11 original. And so I was with them for the first about 3.5 years. And I was the band leader, like I always had been all the way back to junior high. I was the band leader. I wrote all the arrangements. And Johnny wrote most of the vocal arrangements, so he was in charge of that, and I was in charge of the band. And so we had a big hit. Oh, by the way, before you even go any further, West Point promising me the Ed Sullivan Show in December of '68.
Right.
Brooklyn Bridge was on the Ed Sullivan Show the same year, December of '68.
And you were in it?
And I was in it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so
that's amazing.
I said I made the right decision.
Yeah. Oh, my gosh.
That's
terrific.
And it's funny, all these years later, I couldn't wait to be out of the Army. And now I can't wait when I go back for the reunions
nice.
and
So you keep in
performances
touch
and
with some of the vets that you were with?
Even some of the current guys, because like the rock band, I don't think I said this on camera, but we spoke about this earlier. The rock band, which I started at West Point, currently they still have a rock band. It's a different name, but it's the West Point Rock Band. I have been opening up for those guys at Stony Brook Vets Home every year for the last 4 or 5 years. And they do a beautiful outdoor concert, usually in August or September. I forget which, but
Where's that? At Stony Brook?
Stony Brook State Vets Home. Yeah, over near the college and the medical center.
Nice.
And that's. So I'm
That's
pretty
icing
friendly
on the cake.
with those guys and a lot of the people in the current West Point band.
Did you join any veterans organizations once you were out? Or?
I'm kind of like unofficially in the Rocky Point VFW, but because I was never overseas, that's really for people overseas. And there's I'm constantly doing, free shows now. I totally believe in giving back, especially to the vets, but not just the vets. I'm doing a big freebie from Hicksville High School coming up soon. And people have called me, my grandson has this really bad disease, and we need to raise funds. I'm always there. I say, I'm there for free, and I put it out on my whole Facebook blast, and I make sure everybody comes. And so I total 100% believe in giving back. Part of the reason is with what I did in the Army. What I did, and I'm still here. So I really, I'm always there. When people need me, I'm always there because,
Now, when you perform now, let's say at the high school, are you with a group or you do it solo?
The high school, I've been doing a solo thing for about the past 15 years. And
singing and playing?
I sing, and, I when there's a baby grand piano, like at the high school, I incorporate that into it. I started teaching myself piano. That's the only thing the piano and guitar I taught myself. The other things I really knew from Hicksville. But I taught myself piano because I needed to arrange for the Brooklyn Bridge. So I needed to be able to hear from here to here parts, and then it kind of got to the point where I knew how to play it. So I play that. I play guitar. I play piccolo and flute. And sax, of course, and sing, during my solo things. And I love doing the solo thing. I started with a band recently, which is called Beyond the Bridge, and that's kind of like I hate the word tribute band because there's so many of them out now, and I don't really call it a tribute, but we bill it as a musical love letter to Johnny Maestro.
Nice. That's nice.
So we're doing his songs from the Crests and his songs from the Brooklyn Bridge, and all of the great songs that were around his song, the context of what he did. So every time you hear a Johnny song, I'll put like 3 other things that well, first of all, everybody knows all of his songs, but they also know all of like the songs that were like, maybe he was number one, he was number two and number three. For his whole career, we do that. So I'm doing a little bit of that, but I love doing the solo thing. I don't have to worry about anybody getting up late and missing the job. I don't have to worry about anybody. I don't like that song. I don't want to do it.
Right. You're on your own.
I pick, what I want to do. I do my own arranging. Put
Very
everything.
nice.
So I love doing that. Most of what I do for the vets is all solo because I don't want to ask. There's no other vets in my band, and I don't want to ask people who are non-vets to work
Donate
for free.
their time.
So that's why I'm glad, I can do it
It's very
myself.
nice you're doing that. It's like paying back.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
very nice.
Yeah.
How do you think, what sort of life lessons do you think you learned from the military?
Oh, a lot.
Yeah?
A lot. Yeah, the discipline. I was very undisciplined. I mean, I've always been disciplined as a musician.
Musicians usually are. That's the
Yeah,
thing. I'm surprised you say that.
I never, ever made extra money by doing all the arrangements for the Brooklyn Bridge. Just never even thought about it. Or any of the band. We would split things evenly with all of the bands that I was in. But for every 4-hour rehearsal that I ever had in my life, I put in probably 36 hours to be able to have, be prepared.
Yeah.
So that 4 hours, we'd get the most out of it. So I always had that discipline. But, anything else in life.
Making your bed?
Yeah,
Things like
I
that.
wasn't good at that kind of stuff. So the basic training thing, one thing I can tell you, I was a single parent for a while before I met Susan, my wife. And she immediately became a mother to my
nice.
son who was like 5 years old and my stepdaughter who was like 10.
Nice.
But there was I'd say 6-8 months where I was really like a single mother. And I say that instead of single father because I have so much respect for, what single mothers go through. But one thing that I can relate back to basic training was washing dishes. I used to have to pay babysitters, like half of what I made because I was working in an advertising job for this 6 or 8 months, maybe 50 hours a week. And then I was in a wedding band playing 5 gigs a weekend.
This is after your service?
This is way after my service. Way after, yeah. But it's I thought about it at the time, and anytime anybody asked me about discipline, I think back to coming back to the babysitters would never wash dishes. They cook, they feed, because I would come back like after a wedding on a Saturday night, like 3 o'clock in the morning, and there would be dishes stacked up to here. And when I did KP up at West Point and in basic training, I would have washed dishes and take out the garbage for like 200 people.
Wow.
So a sack full of dishes was like nothing, nothing to me, And the whole thing about, cleaning and making the bed and all of that stuff seemed stupid, but like even that all had to do with the eventual, anybody who had to actually be in combat. The discipline was just super important. You had to like hear an order and not even think about it, and just do it.
Just do it.
And that really does apply. Oh, and getting up like at the right time. Still, I missed a couple of parades up at West Point for oversleeping.
Really?
Yeah, and I was like skating.
What happens to you then?
Well, you really you miss enough and you're out of there.
Oh.
You know what I mean?
Out of the service?
So I have an internal alarm clock now, an internal alarm clock. I still set my cell phone when I have to get up in the morning, but I can't tell you how the phone dies overnight, and it doesn't ring. And I wake up exactly, like if it was 6:15 a.m., I wake up at 6:15.
That's pretty good.
Because sometimes I wake up 2 or 3 minutes before the alarm, and I say, well, I can sleep for 3 more minutes.
Right.
But that internal alarm, that was from the fear of God about oversleeping,
That's pretty good. It's good to
and
learn those
missing
things.
details,
Yeah.
And it's character building, really is.
How do you think your military service impacted your feelings about the military and war in general?
It's interesting because, being part of the military, I'm very emotionally connected to a lot of people who are combat vets, And we mentioned this earlier, that people like me who were not combat vets, some of us feel, and I've had these feelings too, which is, and I will get back to this particular question, but I think it's very important for the purpose of this, for especially if any of my fellow vets who were not combat are participated in this and are seeing this, that I have a good friend who is I'm not sure if he still is, but the president of the Suffolk chapter of Vietnam Vets of America. And I used to sit next to him at a lot of, I would donate singing for a lot of the assemblies that they would have at Rocky Point High School,
Nice.
where I would sing Proud to be an American. And those guys would bring in the colors and sometimes tell stories about combat. And he told me, anytime anybody asks for, are there any Vietnam vets in the room? He goes, you better stand. I said, well, you know, normally I would say Vietnam era, you know, which I still like to say. He says, no, you're a Vietnam vet. He goes, you enlisted, not only regret, he goes, you enlisted and you signed the papers, and that's a contract for your life with the government at any time.
Very right.
Things could have happened, you know, and when we look back on maybe 90% of the military of all branches are support, you know? It's
Very
support,
important.
and it is important, and without the support, there's no intelligence. You don't know where the enemy is. You don't know who to attack, you know, without the artillery and even the mail. You don't get mail from home.
Sure.
You know, so there's so much. So I'm telling you, all of my fellow vets who were not in combat feel proud.
Good.
You can always feel
you should.
extra proud of your buddies, you know, who were in combat or maybe didn't come back from combat. So that's always a special place in our heart. But we should all, you know, that's coming from the combat vets.
Yeah.
You know,
That's
so
great.
I just
That's very good
like to make
attitude.
that point. So I'm sorry. What was the?
So the question was, what are your feelings about the military in general, and war in the military?
And war
in
in
general?
I'm very anti-war, extremely anti-war. But, you know, war is necessary. Even the Catholic Church and all religions support the military because, you know, there are justifiable wars, you know, and it's for the survival of your country. So we wouldn't be a country if it wasn't for the revolution. You know, a lot of times when I do my Veterans Day things, I remind people, you know, look, people like to talk about the Vietnam vets and the World War II vets like there were no other vets.
Right.
I always tell people, you know, please remember Valley Forge and the Revolutionary War people who, you know, they fought for this, to create this country.
Yes.
And a lot of people, you know, if they can't directly relate, I had a relative who did this, you know, but you know, the country is a family. So, you know, I'd say, you know, look back. So definitely justifiable wars. And the problem is with a non-justifiable war, is that you have to stand up and fight for your country, whether it's justified or not. And, you know, it's up to the politicians to decide and the historians to decide. But, you know, having been in the military, it's, you know, we have always stood up as a family and as a country, and you have to support our military.
Yeah.
You know, one thing I know that the Vietnam I just heard something on the news. A whole bunch of Vietnam era combat vets who just recently went to Vietnam for the first time in over 50 years, and they came back, and in their hometowns they had huge parades and celebrations for them, because when they came home, I get a little choked up, but when they came home for the first time, they got nothing. You know, they were lucky if they got nothing, and they got yelled at.
It was terrible.
And spit on. I mean, you know, it was terrible. So thank God, you know, and a lot of that has to do with, you know, I mentioned the Kennedy tragedy, which not only inspired me, it inspired a lot of people my age, my generation. 9/11 did the same thing for the military. So many people volunteered to be part of the military, you know, for the Gulf War, and. You know, a Desert Storm, you know, everything that has followed. And thank God, you know, now the whole country is on board and supporting the military, but really, in the history.
It took a long time for that to
It took a long time to catch up, you know. And fortunately, a lot of us are still alive.
Yeah,
you know.
appreciate it.
Yep.
Is there anything, Tommy, we haven't covered that you'd like to share? Anything we missed?
I think we covered a lot of ground.
Yeah,
you know?
That's great.
One thing I would like to say, you know, my pet project is the Stony Brook Vets Home, and they are absolutely wonderful organization. There's so many volunteers that are there Some are there every single day.
Really?
For no pay.
Are they all past military?
No, many of them are not military at all. And, and the paid staff, most of the paid staff aren't military either. But that they are an amazing facility. They take such good care of them, and they're
Really?
so honored.
Oh, that's great.
I do their Golf Classic fundraiser every year for free, and we've raised well over $1 million in the last
Nice.
eight years or so. But they have had big cuts in their funding. So if anybody's listening to this that is a politician or knows politicians, please see what you can do about, writing to the federal government and New York State government, and let's see what we can do about maybe correcting that mistake.
That's a good plug.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much for your service,
Oh, thank you,
Tommy.
Ed.
Thank you for
Thank you.
sharing all your thoughts and memories.
Thanks.
Thank you.